I am Arvid Hallén. I'm 63 years old. I am Director General for 500 people. I'm steward for 1 billion euros of Norwegian public funding, research funding. There are still too many people like me in positions like mine. Too many senior level research positions are given to men. Research projects, research questions, research management, and research results still reflect the imbalance between the genders. It is my intention to do something about this. The system I manage are based on the principle of objectivity. It is the best that counts, that the best ones win. The research system is based on the assumption of quality, regardless of gender, lies at the heart of our effort to recruit individual talent and select projects for funding. That is the kind of system I want to work with. But a growing number of disturbing examples in research indicate that these principles do not always apply. One quite spectacular example that made a big impression on me, and probably others, was a study from Yale University published a couple of years ago. In this study, a random sample of researchers were asked to assess applicants for a position as a laboratory manager. Everyone assessed the very same application individually, but for half of the group, the applicant's name was Jennifer, and for the other half, the applicant's name was John. Overall, John was found to be more competent than Jennifer, and thus had a greater chance to be nominated for the position. John was also offered a better salary and a better follow-up. Moreover, it is perhaps especially interesting to note that the female and male researchers in the group both gave John higher marks than Jennifer. We all bring biases to the table, stronger, much stronger than we would like to believe. And the same biases are at work in other spheres as well. Today, we find a fair gender balance among the musicians in a symphony orchestra. But it wasn't always like this. The proportion of women increased dramatically when potential new members auditioned behind a curtain rather than in full view. When the panel of judges couldn't see the musicians, the gender composition of the orchestra changed. A recent news article reported that hurricanes with female names are more destructive than hurricanes with male names. Why? Because people take fewer precautions when a hurricane has a female name. Quite simply, implicit bias can have a lethal effect, and implicit gender bias is probably common throughout all areas of society. It is kind of an unconscious assumption that underlies the way we interact with each other. This is true for how we conduct research activity as well as for how we fund research projects. When we think we choose the best based on objective criteria, implicit biases might play a role in our assessment. People don't want to discriminate, or only very few do. But being unaware of how these mechanisms work, we can easily end up fostering discrimination. We may encourage the selection of men over women on the wrong grounds. This applies to every link in the chain, and it applies to major decisions. It is not only about biases, it's also about how we organize the research system and how we organize the career systems. And we end up not taking full potential of our human resources. Agencies and heads of institutions have a special responsibility to understand this, to acknowledge this, and accept the consequences of what this means. I shot personally this picture of the Norwegian university rectors just a week ago. 8 universities, 4 female rectors, and 4 male rectors. This is a nice gender balance. Compared with other countries in Europe, Norway has one of the highest proportions of women on boards of directors and as heads of research institutions. But when it comes to grade A professorships, Norway is, I'm sorry to say, on the European average or slightly below. Throughout Europe, women are clearly underrepresented in senior level positions and research management. The pace of change is too slow. This is a challenge shared by all of us in the European research system. And in some areas, the imbalance is especially alarming. This is true for initiatives promoting research excellence and in business sector research, areas that are critical for achieving European research and innovation policy objectives. So what can research councils do? What can the Research Council of Norway do? A lot, I think. Let's have a look at our mandate. We cover all fields of research. In brief, we are a sort of a bank, we are a sort of a coach, and we are a venue. As a bank, we provide funding for research. As a coach, we advise the authorities on which research areas should be prioritized. And as a venue, we serve as a meeting place and a connector for all actors in the research system. We definitely carry a very broad mandate, and this gives us great responsibilities and great opportunities. We've had the gender challenges on our table for many years. Last year, as Kurt told you, the Research Council adopted a new gender equality policy. This policy is stating that we will assume an even greater responsibility for promoting gender balance in the research system. We want to enhance our knowledge about gender and also integrate gender perspectives in the funding of research and innovation. We seek to be a driving force in these areas nationally and internationally. We are now working actively to translate this into several concrete practical initiatives. Our point of departure is simple. Measures are necessary, and we know that measures work. Let me give you some examples of what we have been doing. In 2003, the Research Council launched the Centers of Excellence scheme. The objective was to strengthen Norwegian research by funding the best research initiatives more generously and for more years, 5 + 5 years. We launched the first call and award in 2003 and awarded 13 centers. The second call was launched 5 years later with 8 new centers. And through the third call, we substituted the first 13 calls with 13 new centers. We have 21 centers all spread around the country. But what about the gender balance? All of the first generation of centers ended up with male directors, and male researchers dominated at the junior and senior levels as well. This was not acceptable. In this first call, we had no gender initiative. When we announced the second call 5 years later, emphasis was placed on gender balance in the grant applications. It was a kind of a nudge. applicants were requested to tell us how they would work to recruit women and promote career development for female researchers. An earmarked sum of money was set aside to encourage the centers to implement active measures. And the third call did the same. The impact was quite significant. The proportion of female PhD grantees increased from 35% for the first group of centers to 53% of the new centers. At the postdoctoral level, the proportion rose from 27% to 44%, and among senior level researchers from 17% to 23%. This distribution of women and men has remained the same for the third call, except that the proportion of women at the senior level saw a significant increase from 23 to 33%. Experience shows that simple, concrete measures can go a long way in significantly improving the gender composition. But to bring about more radical changes, we need leaders who take an active role. Let me illustrate with an example from the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø. You all know this. In the Norwegian institutions we have, as in other countries, fewer women in top positions. 10 years ago, the University of Tromsø had the lowest proportion of women professors of all the universities in Norway, below 10%. 10 years later, the comparable figure was close to 30%. In the course of a few years, this university had increased the proportion of women professors at a rate twice as fast as the other universities. They achieved these results through targeted efforts, concrete measures, and through active leadership. Allow me to mention that Kurt Rice, introducing me, was active in this process. The University of Tromsø has now become a positive example of gender balance in a Norwegian context, and other institutions are implementing similar measures. Still, the general picture, though, is that progress is too slow. But we need measures, and measures work. At the Research Council, we saw a need for a broad national initiative to accelerate the progress already made. The Council has launched a new program targeted at promoting gender balance in senior level positions and research management. This program, called the Balance Program, issued its first call for proposals last year and provides funding for innovative projects in all parts of the research sector. The first projects are about to start with a number of different measures to promote gender balance. As you can see from this slide, the proportion of women with a doctoral degree has been steadily growing, and in Norway now the majority of new PhDs are women. But at the top level positions, they are still dominated by men, even if the share of female full professors is increasing. I sincerely hope that our Balance program will lead to changes, to greater awareness and better practices. The program will facilitate the sharing of experience, developing of toolkits, and perhaps just as important, facilitating competition between leaders to be the best in this area. We will set targets to measure our performance. But what about the gender perspectives in research projects, in the substance of research? In recent years, the Research Council has introduced gender perspectives in research as a mandatory criterion in the assessment of grant applications. All of our programs and initiatives must specifically assess what the gender dimension means for their particular field of knowledge. This seems to be straightforward, but it's definitely not. In some cases, there is also a lack of awareness of the relevance, and the gender differences are not always noticeable. It can be hard to detect, as this picture illustrates. But in the ERA policy and the Horizon 2020, it has been pointed out that gender perspectives are not a sufficiently integral part of research and innovation. Medical researchers have known for a long time the necessity to include gender differences for diagnostics and treatment. But we still find examples of diseases and medical disorders that are gendered in terms of how they are perceived by doctors and conveyed to the general population. Until recently, cardiovascular diseases have been mainly associated with men, and communication about this to the general public has focused on men's symptoms. Very little attention was paid to the fact that the risk of cardiovascular disease in women increases markedly with age, and that women's symptoms develop differently than men's. In fact, women are 9 times more likely to die from heart disease as from breast cancer. Conversely, until recently, male breast cancer was a non-issue. Let me add a few more examples of gender perspectives in research. In several African countries, the right to water is inherently part of the domain of women. Water is essential for maintaining the family's health, nutrition, and food security. Responsibilities that in practical terms are borne by women. But how does it work in practice, and how does it change? Anne Hallén, a professor of women's law at the University of Oslo, heads a research project entitled Human Rights and Gender Dimensions of Water Governance in Africa. The project will take a closer look at the far-reaching changes that have taken place in water resource management systems and the ramifications of these changes, above all on women's responsibility in providing for their families. The gender aspect of the right to water is a central component of this research project. A gender perspective is also extremely relevant in research on war, conflict, and peace building. Research on sexualized violence in conflict and post-conflict situations in former Yugoslavia has generated new knowledge about the dynamics of warfare. What are women's and men's perceptions of security in vulnerable, unstable states? How do women participate in conflict resolution and peace building? Knowledge from this research has tremendous transfer value for other areas of conflict. Both of these examples illustrate the specific relevance and benefits of research with a gender perspective. The gender dimension is not only critical in medicine, social science, and in the humanities. In an increasing number of research fields, technology, the environment, the social security, to name a few, we know that a gender perspective can lead to new insight, cost savings for society, and innovation potential. To conclude, very briefly, we have made some progress in designing effective measures in our portfolio to improve the gender balance and in encouraging institutions to work actively with this issue. We are still facing major challenges, I would say, nationally and internationally, especially regarding research excellence initiatives and research in the business sector. Gender as a part of the substance of research is still one of our greatest challenges. We know it is essential for research quality and our collective understanding of many important areas of society, like my examples showed. But there are too many areas we still do not see clearly enough. It is crucial that the European research community makes more progress in this area. It is easier to change things that we can see and acknowledge, but many of our biases are hard for us to pinpoint. A key challenge for all of us is to try to find the hidden biases. We can bring about the changes we are seeking when we isolate the problems and address them. When we challenge ourselves and the research community at large to raise questions about what we take for granted. When we understand that we see the world through glasses that are tinted by our cultural and social backgrounds. I wish you all the best for the conference. Thank you very much.